Welcome, everybody, to Conservation Conversations with Stornoway. It's great to be back now that our Royal Albert Hall show is behind us. It was quite the evening. Thank you very much for being there if you were. And if you weren't, we may be able to share something of the audio with you at some point. Details to be revealed later. But we had a great time and we played a lot of the soundscapes from rare habitats and biodiverse places around the world that we had planned. So that all went smoothly enough, despite all three band members getting lost in the basement of the Albert Hall mid-performance. We'll get someone to recount that for you one day. But if you were there, you'll know what I'm talking about. There was about 2 minutes of fairly awkward silence, interrupted only by the hums of a blue whale. Anyway, here we are, post Albert Hall. The next big thing on the horizon is our trip next month to South Africa to record with Ladysmith Black Mambazo. If you've got any questions about that, please get in touch. And then it's on to the festival season. So we're playing at Norwich and Norfolk Festival, 8th of May. We're playing Beverley in June 19th. And we're up in Compton Valley in Sussex on the 22nd of August, 28th of August at Found Festival. Many opportunities to see Stornoway. There's 2 Singing with Nightingales events as well, led by Sam Lee, who you will have heard as a guest on this podcast last year. So keep your eyes on the tour calendar. Most importantly, if you want the big club gigs with a full band, come along in October and February, because we are touring the new Beyonder album. And if you haven't pre-ordered your copy yet, please go and do that. I'm tremendously excited to share that with you and to continue these conservation conversations. We've had a really positive response to all of them. And now that the big busy show is behind us, we can return to doing them about weekly. And for the first new guest of this season, I'm very excited to be joined today by one of the bookers and creators for Whitchurch Folk Festival, one of our favorites. It's happening on the 9th of May. I'm strongly encouraging everyone to go grab tickets for that. It's got a brilliant lineup. You've got Chris Draver, Angeline Morrison, Blair Dunlop Trio. This is some of the artists we've actually interviewed on this series before, if you want to scroll back and look at their interviews with us. But just go along. It's going to be the best day out. And with me to discuss that today is Jon Wilks. Welcome, Jon. Great to have you here.
Hi, Ollie. Thanks for having me. How are you doing? Well, I've just heard how you're doing. Sounds like you had a spinal tap moment in the Royal Albert Hall.
Yeah. We had been prepping for that show for well over a year.
Wow.
And most of the intricacies of the preparation work were to do with the soundscape. We brought in a 360-degree immersive sound experience for people. And the problem is now they're going to be asking why we don't do that at every show going forward.
Well, you can only do what you can do.
Yeah, we were so excited to play that venue for the first time. Maybe we'll go back there someday, but
Yeah.
It all went
I
well.
saw some photos from it. It looked wonderful.
Thank you very much. Yeah, still surfing the wave of the love that came out of that.
I bet you are.
Yeah.
Well done.
Thank you very much. Is that a venue that you've? What's your favourite gig you've seen in the Royal Albert Hall?
I think probably Bob Dylan. I've seen Bob Dylan about 8 or 9 times in my life, and he's always a bit of a experiment. Like you never know what you're going to get, and sometimes you get something that's absolutely awful, and he clearly can't be bothered to be where he is that night. And then other nights, something just happens, and he's there with all his magic and all his legend, and he's exactly what you want him to be. And that's happened twice in the times that I've seen him. Maybe I've seen him, as I say, 8 or 9 times, and maybe 4 times out of those he's been okay. 3 times out of those he's been absolutely dreadful, and twice he's been sensational, and one of them was at the Royal Albert Hall.
Wow. I think there's something really magical about those artists who can give you that unpredictability and maybe temperamentality, but keep you on your toes, keep you guessing.
Absolutely. I think that the trick with Dylan, my advice to anybody, I mean, you probably, given his age now, you probably don't have too many times to try this out left, but if you do, don't go with anybody else. Go on your own, because if you go with anybody else, then you take with you their expectations of what Bob Dylan should be. So inevitably they come out and say, he didn't play this song, or he didn't play that song, or I didn't recognize this or that or the other. And you just have to go in and experience what
Yeah.
he is doing in that moment.
Very useful advice. Thank you. I'll keep my eyes out for single tickets. See if I can get along. Well, the other thing about Bob Dylan is looking at the history and especially his visits to London, taking in the folk clubs back in the 60s, would it have been, when he met so many of the folk revival scene from London. And I know you've had a lot to do with many folks from that scene, playing guitar for Martin Carthy, for instance. Is there any particular memories you associate between Bob Dylan and that era when he was here in the clubs?
I mean, obviously, I'm far too young to have been there at the time, but I mean, yes, you like there are, you spend time with Martin Carthy, and you're going to get Bob Dylan stories because they were so entwined in the early '60s, when Dylan first came here in 1962 and spent time at the King and Queen pub in Holborn, which is in Fitzrovia, Foley Street, which is where Dylan first went to look for sort of live music in London, and that's where he encountered Martin Carthy, and they became good friends. And then they would go to the Troubadour, which is still in Earl's Court. These places are still there. I think at the King and Queen, they occasionally still even do a folk club there. Somebody should kick it off again because it's a legendary place. But yeah, there's lots and lots of that stuff. My interest is particularly around Soho. The book that I'm writing to do with Les Cousins, the legendary folk club that was on Greek Street, is obviously sort of heavily focused on Soho, and a few years after Dylan was there. So that's sort of 65 to 72, and sort of dealing with the likes of Bert Jansch and Nick Drake and people like that. Lots and lots of stories to do with that.
Yeah, and so much interesting political history there as well, right? Some of the clubs running at the time were very much tied to, say, communism as a force that was happening at the time.
Well, I mean, sort of, I think there was that. There's also that, folk music in itself inspired sort of certain political leanings. And, certainly if you're going back into the work of Ewan MacColl, and A.L. Lloyd and sort of various people like that, then there was a definite political focus to what they were doing, and a reason for them to be singing the songs that went beyond just singing nice songs. They had purpose, and they had reasons for picking the songs that they wanted to sing. Yes. So yeah, so places like the Ballads and Blues Club, which I think was in Holborn, as I mentioned before, mistaken. That was a place where that was very much the case, but also it was a place that had its sort of typically felt that it was the people who ran it felt that they were doing something that gave a sort of freedom of expression, but at the same time they were very kind of gatekeeperish about who got to sing in those clubs and what you were allowed to sing in those clubs. And Martin Carthy remembers, when he first tried to go and sing in those clubs, they wouldn't let him in because he had a guitar. So folk music was not music that you would play with a guitar. That was strictly forbidden. Folk music had to be performed largely unaccompanied. And if you were Ewan MacColl, then you would insist that everybody sang those songs in their own accents and their own dialects, even though he was singing in a Scottish accent despite being from Manchester. So rules for one person, not for other people. So
yeah, really fascinating. I'm really thrilled about the openness and the inclusivity in the folk scene these days, where I feel like you can turn up to, say, the Manchester Folk Festival, which is an event that's quite strongly tied to this podcast, and Stornoway members head there every year to enjoy. We go there, and there's the sense that anyone can turn up and start singing anything in any accent, and it'll be welcomed. And that's the case at all the sing-arounds that I've attended over the years, and the folk community have really welcomed us in. Certainly, our songs to date haven't tended to be very much about world events or trying to drive people into any way of thinking or doing anything. Although I must say our new album Beyonder has a bit of that, because we are talking about how to bring people closer together in this quite fraught time where it seems harder than ever to
Mm,
reach across political divides. But more of that later.
mm,
I want to talk about a very wonderfully inclusive folk event that you're
mm.
part of, which is the Whitchurch Folk Festival,
Sure.
and especially just the lineup. And perhaps you could tell us a bit, get folks excited about who they can see if they grab a ticket to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning it. It's a one-day festival. As you said, it's on May 9th, so not terribly long to go now. And it's run in the beautiful town of Whitchurch, which is in North Hampshire, just north of Winchester. It's a town festival, so it's not a festival that's out in the field. We make use of all of the old buildings. It's heavily centered around Whitchurch Silk Mill, which is one of the only remaining working watermill based silk mills. That's very caveated, isn't it? But it's beautiful. It's this 17th century silk mill, 18th century silk mill, sorry, that's at the center of the town, and we take over the lawns around it, and we fill it with music and dancing and all sorts. And it's for the whole town, so it's it's the local kids get involved, and they're heavily involved in the parade, where we have a Jackie in the green who parades through the town and leads everybody through. And we try to bring in the great and the good of the modern folk scene as best as we can, for that one day. And it's lovely. And yes, you've mentioned some of the people who are here this year. So we've got Suntu Susu and Ross Grant, and we've got Sid Goldsmith, who's coming along with his band Taran. We've got the extraordinary Chris Drever. We've got the Rosie Hood Band, Lisa Knapp, Jerry Diver, Angeline Morrison, Cara Ellen Band, who are a great little Welsh band that I've recently been playing a bit with occasionally, and they've been coming and supporting me on an event or two, and I've reciprocated. And Blair Dunlop Trio, as you mentioned, Taran I've mentioned already, Arthur and Kieran, Anna Tabush. There's loads and loads of stuff coming on. Patakas as well. And Patakas, if you're not sure, are Joe and Will Sartin, two young players. Their father, Paul Sartin, was a member of Bellowhead, and he was my neighbour pretty much. He lived about 200 metres away from me, and we ran the Whitchurch Folk Club together that we started in 2017. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago quite suddenly, and so we took it upon ourselves, myself and some of his friends from the town, to put together the folk festival in his name, because it was something that he and I used to talk about. He was desperate to launch it. He was, we made a lot of plans, we had lots of meetings, and we never really got round to doing anything with it. Like I say, we did relaunch this folk club, which has been almost 10 years in the running now, but the festival itself was something sadly he never got to see. But we run it every year in his name, and his sons come and play it every year, and it's a wonderful celebration of the folk tradition and also of his legacy as well.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I really want to encourage all Stornoway fans to consider heading down to this. So early May, what better thing to do than head down to Whitchurch on the 9th? A lot of us are going to be over in Oxford for the May morning celebration. We tend to go to
Are
that
you?
one, although, say, Padstow has its magical tradition going on, and all over the country, there's people are waking up to summer. But from the 1st of May in Oxford, just over a week later, why not continue the May celebrations with the Jackie and the Green that you mentioned?
Absolutely. Are you near Oxford? You're in London, are you?
Well, our band was headquartered in Oxford. We formed there in, say, 2005. So it's actually our 21st anniversary this year. Personally, I live in Southeast London, which is a place that we've sung about since the early days. It's in one of our lyrics. We have a song that mentions right next to each other the streets of Cowley, Oxford, and Southeast London, which is where Brian used to do some work as a duck population counter. I suppose he was doing research into how to help ducks thrive. We're a very birdie band.
Birdie band. Okay.
Yeah. But I want to talk a bit about just one of the artists you've mentioned there. So Chris Draver, he's a real highlight. And I think going back to his album Before the Ruin, which was with Roddy Wimble and John McCusker, 2008. So that was a time when Stornoway hadn't quite found its feet or its sort of identity, and we were getting lumped in with folk as a genre, which was kind of the new folk label
Yeah.
existed, and there were some exciting things happening in almost the pop folk world.
Mm.
We sort of didn't understand the linkage. We thought maybe it's just because we've got an acoustic guitar and some melodies, and so around 2008, I encountered Chris's album, and I loved it for just what it was, rather than because I saw any similarity with us. And then over the years, with that album, Before the Ruin, and so much other folk music, particularly increasingly trad music, starting to fill my sort of awareness of what music comes from the UK, and I'm not from here myself. I started to realize that maybe there is something deep down in Stornoway which gives us a place in in the folk scene. So we're starting to become more a part of things and going along to Manchester Folk Festival regularly, like I mentioned. But just going back to that Before the Ruin album, it's still, for almost 20 years now, has been for me a real showcase exemplar of what's possible with modern original songwriting that sounds ancient. And I wanted to ask you one of the questions I ask all my guests, which is if you have a particular example of a piece of folk music which takes the old and perhaps sounds old and uses old formats and approaches, but actually is quite original and creative and innovative in what it does. So blends the old and the new.
So, are you asking particularly about a song that is new and references the old, or from any era?
Let's go with the former. Yeah, anything that perhaps when you first heard it, you thought, "Hang on, this is this has to be one of the old ballads that I didn't know
Yeah.
about, but actually turned out to be original."
I mean, I think Chris is a great example of that. I think Angeline Morrison is a great example of
Yes.
that. I think what Angeline's done is extraordinary because, you know the story with Angeline, I'm sure, that she went into the archives to try to find the music of the black people, or the non-white people of the British Isles throughout history, and couldn't find it, other than, as I remember, she memorably put it to me, that that they were there, but they were always the butt of some hideous joke.
Yeah.
And what I loved about her Sorrow Songs album was that she took music that sounded for all the world like it was from the English tradition, and wrote these characters into the place that they belonged. I think that album is a work of genius, in that sense, in the way that Angeline was able to do that. I don't think there's any better version. And I was going to talk about Chris, and I do think that Chris is an outstanding songwriter. And before you started rolling the cameras on this, we were talking very briefly about Paul Simon, and I think Chris is up there. Like, I think some of what Chris has done is that level of songwriting. But I don't think that. Yeah, I think he takes some. There are elements of what Chris does that comes from the tradition, and I think with what I get the sense with Chris's music is he's a guy who's just been soaked so deeply in the traditions of the islands that he comes from those islands up there off the coast of Scotland. He's just so heavily soaked in that tradition that he can't not write in that style. It's going to come through in every way, but he's not purposefully writing in that style. It's just that is what's natural to him. That's, he's not sitting down and going, today I'm going to write a song in the style of a traditional Scottish ballad.
Yes.
He just writes music that is in that style because it's in his blood. Whereas with Angeline's piece of work, I think she wrote music that, I think that is in her blood as well. But I think she was very purposefully writing in the style that fit with that project. If that makes sense.
Oh, certainly, yeah. Both those artists have been a real yeah, a sort of education for me personally and the whole band. I think in what's possible with folk music, and I think you have to sit with folk as a scene or a genre for years to really discover that there's so many layers of the rich layers of this kind of thing. It's not just people turning up and playing old songs, which is where I think a lot of the reputation of the folk scene is
Yeah,
stuck.
I think, yeah, I had an interesting journey into it, really, in that I wasn't what you would call a folkie. I was brought up in a house where my parents listened to a mixture of things that included Dire Straits and Eric Clapton and Paul Simon and the Beatles, and Simon and Garfunkel was a huge thing, and that Simon and Garfunkel was the nearest thing that I would get to what people might have referred to as folk. But the more that you get into the folk scene, the more that you realize that that term folk can be, has different meanings to different people. So it was Simon and Garfunkel initially. Then my mother got divorced. My parents got divorced, and my mother, her new partner, brought with him Burt Jansch and
Mm.
brought with him John Martin and people like that. And so I was suddenly into that slightly more Soho Les Cousins world. I personally discovered Nick Drake almost literally by stumbling over him, because I come from the village next to where he was born and raised and where he's buried. I
Mm.
went out for a walk in the churchyard with a friend, walking my friend's dog, and we came across a graveyard that was festooned in flowers and letters and plectrums. And sort of I bent down and had a look at these, and immediately went off to the record shop and bought an introduction to Nick Drake. So all of those sort of ways into it were me getting into what I thought was the folk world. But as I got older and got more interested and met people like Paul Sartin, who, as I mentioned before, from Bellowhead, who lived in the village and was deeply involved in the traditional scene. And then I met sort of the likes of Eliza Carthy and, Jim Murray and people like that, Nick Hart, these people who were really involved in what you would call traditional folk.
Mm.
In various ways, they all approach traditional folk in various ways. I became much more and more interested in what you would call the tradition, and so at that point, you start to see a difference between the singer-songwriter and traditional folk music. It's all just labels eventually, and it's all just music. But
Mm.
but there is, yeah, there's. I mean, I found, in much the same way as you were talking about Stornoway and. Initially feeling like you were slightly outsiders in this world of folk. You'd been labeled it, but you weren't really it, because you didn't really know what it was. I felt very much like that, and I still do to a certain extent, even though I've made albums that are traditional folk albums to all intents and purposes. I still feel that I am standing on the sidelines, kind of cheering everybody else on. Like, I'm not really a folk musician, even though I played a set yesterday or 2 days ago, and 60% of it was traditional songs. I find it's an odd thing. I'm just a musician, Ollie.
Yes. Well, an excellent one, if you don't mind by saying. Your guitar parts have inspired a lot of what I personally have done. I've got
Oh,
a project on the side which is 365 Days of Folk, where
yeah,
I do a folk
I
song
know it.
each day. And I think it was your version of Tonkorai, or Sakura, these Japanese songs.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, so
Sounds
thanks for that.
interesting.
You mentioned Nick Drake, and I just wanted to return briefly to that as a weird example, such a great story there of your stumbling across him, and similarly for me, it was stumbling across via the books Electric Eden and White Bicycles. I was trying to read about the folk scene before really encountering much of the
Yeah,
music, and it was Rob Young's Electric Eden and Joe
yeah,
Boyd's White Bicycles.
yeah,
Um, but the way Joe writes about it was that Nick Drake had been fairly unknown in his life, and his lack of huge or mainstream success was part of what made him sort of become such an inward-looking person towards the end. But the the fact that you use the word labels, that's all labels and it's all just music. And Nick Drake somehow escaped being labeled at that time by the generation that he was trying to appeal to. But to the extent that, as Joe Boyd puts it, when people discover him now, or when his renaissance sort of started, perhaps in the late 90s, they were discovering an artist who hadn't been labeled by their parents' generation. So he was just this untouched legacy that they could explore and come to own.
Yeah.
So in a way, not having the success in one's lifetime can be a real way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it. It hadn't really occurred to me that certainly when I discovered Nick Drake, and once I discovered Nick Drake, there was no way out. Like, I was just a devotee, and I think a lot of people are the same way. I do know people who don't get him, and that's fine. But for me, there's just I mean, it just sounds cliched, but there's just a layer of magic there that I just find, even though it's just 3 albums, and maybe the tragedy helps, but there's just a delicacy and a sort of it's just so hard to find the words for, but a layer of magic, let's put it like that for now, there that I still find fascinating. And I still, even though there's only, we're talking about what, 35 songs sort of officially released originally, and I still find those just bewitching. There's the word, bewitching. But he's not folk, and he's only folk because somebody's decided that because he played an acoustic guitar and he was a finger picker and he came from that era, that's what he is. I found, like so many people, I found it very, very difficult to work out where you go back from Nick Drake. If you're one of those people who listens to a record and then goes, where did this come from? What inspired this? I'm going to go on this journey and I'm going to find it. So, let's say you listen to Blur in the 90s and you read that they were influenced by the Kinks, and suddenly you're back and learning about the Kinks. And then you read that the Kinks were inspired by Muddy Waters, and suddenly you're back into Muddy Waters, and you can go on these amazing journeys. With Nick Drake, you couldn't do that. Like, there was no way, there was no point before him until 15, 20 years ago, they released the recordings of his mother. And you're like, oh, well, that's where it comes from. It's like, it's really obvious.
Piano player, wasn't she?
She was a piano player, yeah. And a very kind of mournful kind of English singer, and quite a lot of his melodic ideas seem to have come straight from the nursery. And yeah, I find it quite a fascinating thing. But what you just said is really interesting. When I discovered him, he wasn't, my parents knew nothing of him. Like, he was mine. Absolutely that. It was like, this is somebody from your generation, Mum, Dad, that you don't know about, that you should know about. Like,
yeah, I'm gonna show you, what taste is.
Absolutely, yeah.
Interesting.
And interestingly, my mum said to me recently, in a rather forlorn conversation, she said, I've decided that at my funeral I want Northern Sky by Nick Drake. And it's like, wow, there you go. Full circle.
Right. Well, you mentioned place as well as something that was important here. So Nick came from, was it the village next to yours?
Tamworth in Arden.
Yeah. And what a magical place Tamworth is, because it's to this day obviously the site of pilgrimages to go see, for fans to go see where he came from.
Yeah.
And I think they've hosted that festival, Lunar Festival, haven't they?
They used to, yeah. I think I haven't seen that it's happened in recent years. Maybe it does. I don't know. I never got to go to it. I never got round to it before it sort of stopped being a major thing. But yes, it is a sort of a kind of quintessential English village on top of a little hill, and sort of, the view from the graveyard is exquisite, and of course his house is around the corner, which is massive, and he's, in terms of sort of privilege and that kind of thing, he was very unlike a lot of his peers. And very sort of separated. And I believe, from what I've read, that's part of the thing that sort of made him feel a bit othered in of himself anyway.
Well,
we had go ahead.
Well, I was just going to talk about the importance of place there, and how the history of one's belonging to a place or experiencing a place, and then the fact that a festival might be cited somewhere specific because of the collective history of the people involved.
Mhm.
And perhaps you could just tell us a little bit more about Whitchurch and what is so special about the location there. You mentioned the mill, but
Mm.
also just for you personally and musically, is there a particular place, perhaps in Whitchurch, where you feel inspired? But particularly if there's one that brings nature into the
Yeah,
music making process.
I mean, you can't get away from nature. I would say, I know that for you, nature is a huge part of what you do and what this is about. And I would say I'm one of those people that would love to be more inspired by nature, but what I find is that I'm so in my own head so much of the time that that's where I find inspiration, which sounds incredibly solipsistic and navel gazing. But I did write a song on I released on a compilation album recently. The song is called "My Lover's Eyes in Song," and what it came out of was the fact that I see all of these wonderful folk musicians, the likes of Martin Simpson particularly jumps to mind, but there are countless others who write songs that are hugely inspired by nature.
Hmm.
And I can't do it because I've never been somebody who knew anything about it. I grew up in nature. I grew up in a little country village, as I say, just on the edge of Birmingham and Warwickshire, and right out there. And a lot of what I've done, certainly, I can think of sort of riffs and guitar pieces that when I play them, I picture myself cycling down Warwickshire country lanes and that kind of thing. So it is there. I just don't know how to speak about it. So I wrote this song that was about how everybody else seems to have the vocabulary, but all I can really do is go and sit in it and then just respond to it musically. It's a difficult thing to talk about. Well, no, not a difficult thing to talk about. It's a difficult thing for me to articulate, I suppose. But in answer to your question, Whitchurch is you can't avoid nature. It is it's in the middle of the south. What would we call it? The North Wessex Downs, it's called. And so it's part of a sort of a natural conservation area. We have going through the middle of it the River Test, which is often described as the cleanest river in England, and it's a chalk aquifer stream. So it sort of bubbles up through the middle of the village, powers the old silk mill there. You can go walking along the silk. We call it the mill trail. There are sort of like 6 or 7 water mills along this sort of a 1 mile stretch, and so you can sort of walk through nature and history while you're here. And we encourage people when they come to the festival, if they're maybe they want to see every concert, but if they want to take a little bit of a break, they can go for a walk along the mill trail and see that it's really that interaction between humans and nature. It's all one anyway, isn't it? But you know what I mean, that sort of like making use of nature's power in order to create through these mills, through these old industrial mills. So there's that. There's musically, there is some history to and folk history to Whitchurch as well. So there's a little road called the Weir, which goes from the edge of the main street up to the river, to the Weir on the river. And at number 2 Weir Cottages in 1904, a chap called Gardner came out here. He was one of the great song collectors. He collected thousands of songs in Hampshire alone. And he came out here to see if he could find any of the old songs. And he came into Whitchurch and he knocked on people's doors, and there's actual sort of written evidence that he knocked on people's doors and he said, "Do you know any of the old songs? Do you know any?" And they mistook him and said, "Sorry, we don't want old songs around here," thinking that he was trying to sell them. He eventually found his way to the local pub, and he asked there, "Do you know anybody around here who can sing me any of the old songs?" And they sent him down to number 2 Weir Cottages, where he encountered an agricultural labourer called Henry Lee. And Henry had a couple of daughters, and between Henry and his daughters on that fateful morning, they sang about 12 songs to him, and he noted them down. And these we would refer to. I mean, obviously, because of your project, how these things work. They travel, they move about. These traditional songs, they belong to everybody and they move everywhere. But to a great extent, I think of them as songs with a postcode, because they often come from a specific place and they mean something to the people at various points in history. They have meant something to somebody in that specific spot. So there's a kind of psychogeographical element to singing and listening to those songs. And the songs that came from Whitchurch included "If I Were a Blackbird," which is an incredibly beautiful old song. Paul Sartin used to sing it. It was more difficult to get Paul to stop singing that song than to get him to start. He would sing it without prompting all the time. "Wild Rover" comes from Whitchurch, or a version of it. Lots and lots of, well, not lots, there are 12 songs that specifically come here. So when I'm out walking my dog, and each day we go walking down the weir and we go walking past number 2 Weir cottages, I have a little hello there to old Henry Lee and the songs that he gave us as we went past. So if you're in Whitchurch for the festival, that's what, 50 meters down the road from the Silt Mill, so you can go and wander down Weir cottages yourself and sort of have a think about the songs and where they come from and their relationship to the river that's running past you.
Brilliant. Wow. I think that's really strong, rich encouragement to anyone considering coming along. And yeah, if you're a fan of the folk music, the May traditions, the history of song collection, and a bit of nature thrown in,
we have the maypole dancing, we have the kids going through the town in the procession. We've got 3 or 4 Morris sides coming into the town. They sort of take over, so there are Morris bells ringing on every corner. We have a chap who comes in and teaches the Hampshire folk tradition of Hampshire stepping. Is a certain kind of Hampshire dance, which I'm afraid I can't tell you any more about because I've never learned it. I'm an awful dancer. But we have all sorts. I'm actually getting excited myself now talking about it. So.
That's brilliant. Well, yeah, I'm really glad we had this chat, because this is a really great way of exploring for music fans out there, a good way to go and spend their Saturday in this early summer.
Absolutely, come along.
And thank you for answering my questions. These are my 2 questions that I ask all my guests, and every conversation the answer is better and better. So that was really genuinely the most fascinating response we've had. Thank you, Jon.
No, not at all. I do tend to rabbit, so I'm sorry.
And I really look forward to that book you mentioned you're working on at the moment. I suppose that might be a while off, but is there anything you'd like to tell the audience about regarding that?
Well, I suppose, I mean, I don't know how long you've got, but I suppose there's 2 things to say. One is that book is happening. It's going to be published by a company called Paradise Road, who specialise in books about counterculture London. So they look a lot into sort of 60s psychedelia, and they look a lot at sort of the folk scene and various things like that. They've done some amazing books, so I'm really excited about that. I'm hoping we'll get it out next year. And the other thing that I'm doing at the moment, which I haven't really told anybody about, so I'm telling you for the first time, really, is
exclusive.
An exclusive is I'm working on an album at the moment with a journalist friend of mine, a guy called Richard Lynes, and it's an album that's going to be called Strange Heavens, and it's to do with the artwork of Stanley Spencer. And it's our kind of musical response to these incredibly beautiful paintings that were painted in a chapel about 3 miles from here. So if you're in Whitchurch for the folk festival and you get a chance, if you stayed overnight and then needed something to do on the Sunday, go to the Sandham Memorial Chapel, because it's probably one of the great unsung monuments to British art that you could find. Nobody seems to know it exists, and it's just breathtaking. So you should go and have a look at that.
Great. Another reason for people to come down.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, Jon, it's been an absolute pleasure. And we'll get the, this conversation shared far and wide with Stornoway fans. And I hope they all come down to see you guys on the 9th of May at Whitchurch Folk Festival.
Stornoway fans.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.